Greetings. Let's do Unit 5 in Block 2, right? Introduction to Romantic Poets. Romantic poetry was a style of poetry developed in Europe in the 18th century and later adopted in America. Despite the name, Romantic poetry was not necessarily concerned with romance or romantic love as its subject matter. 18th century Romantic poetry was in many ways a reaction to the Enlightenment's fascination with reason and science. It was also largely inspired by the French Revolution and other self determination movements in Europe at the time. Understanding the historical background of Romantic poetry requires a more detailed explanation of Romanticism in general. So, Romanticism was a poetic, musical, and artistic movement that was concerned with operatic emotions and individual experiences. Artists and poets of the Romantic era were interested in how individuals perceived the world instead of a rational evidence of new world actually was. They wanted to uplift, celebrate, and explore the biggest emotions that humans could experience, namely love, care. So, characteristics of the romantic poet. The romantic poet stressed on imagination, passion, emotion, nature, and lives of common men, which became the features of romantic poetry. While neoclassical poets stressed on reason and diction, contrasted with romantic poets. In romantic poetry, reason and intellect were subdued, and their place was taken by imaginations, emotions, and passion. In the poetry of all the romantic poets, we find heightened emotional sensibilities and imaginative flights of genius, bordering on heavenly heights uncrossed by the poets of the previous age. Back from set rules, the poetry of the Romantic Revival is in direct contrast to that of Neoclassical. In the 18th century, poetry was governed by set rules and regulations. There will be well prepared lines of poetic composition. Interest in rural life. The poetry of the 18th century was concerned with clubs and coffee houses, during rooms, and the social and political life of London. It was essentially the poetry of town life, common life. Romantic poets started taking interest in the lives of common people, the shepherds, and the cottages, and left the gallant lords and gay butterflies of fashion to the care of novelists. Love of liberty and freedom. In romantic poetry, the emphasis was laid on liberty and freedom of notification. Romantic poets were rebels against tyranny and brutality exercised by tyrants and deposits over humans crushed by poverty and amazed by inhuman laws. Escape to the Middle Ages. In many ways, Romantic poetry proved to be the poetry of escape from the sorrows and sufferings of worldly life and their times to the Middle Ages, where they found the eternal bliss. Predominance of imaginations and emotions. Predominance poetry. In romantic poetry, reason and intellect were subdued and their place was taken by imaginations, emotion, and passion. Uh, in the poetry of all the romantic poets, we find heightened emotions, sensibilities, and imaginative fights of genius reordering on heavenly heights uncrossed by the part of the previous age. Concept of the romantic poet, romanticism was characterized by its emphasis on emotion and individualism, idealization of nature, suspicion of science and industrialization, and glorification of the past with a strong preference for a maternal medieval, rather tell them individual, classical. A movement in art and literature in the Enlightenment and 19th centuries in revolt against the neoclassicism out of the previous centuries. This is accurate, a general definition as can be accomplished. Although Victor Hugo's phrase "liberalism is in life" is gave us. So we can see here analysis of the romantic poem. It was a pushback against modernity and all its associated parts. The romantics were interested in creating an alternative to the growing aristocratic and political norms which came to the Bible burning, the age of enlightenment. They were also very much opposed to close and very surviving. The first generation of poets included William Blake, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and William Wordsworth. And the most recognizable names of the second generation were Byron, Shelley, and Keats. So let's see the introduction part, and we could see the players, very, very important players. They played against this one, right?